there, you're watching World News Program with me, Mariam Zian. To the headlines. Israeli airstrikes on areas in the Gaza Strip wipe out entire families. The resistance says it ambushed an Israeli force in a booby-trapped tunnel in Khan Yunis and targeted occupation soldiers in vehicles in Rafah. Hamas expresses openness to a comprehensive deal. And at the 10th Congress of the Sahrawi Workers' Union, International Voices reaffirmed steadfast support for the Sahrawi people's struggle, calls on the UN Security Council to uphold its responsibilities towards their rights. Sahrawi president asserts that all attempts to undermine their cause will not break their resilience. Next, on the eve of the second rounds of nuclear talks, Tehran cast doubt on Washington's intentions, stressing that an agreement is possible if the US shows realism. Moscow reiterates its readiness to mediate, while the US Secretary of State urges Europe to decide whether to reimpose sanctions on Iran. And following US-European talks aimed at ending the war in Ukraine, Washington threatens to withdraw from mediation efforts if no progress is made. Moscow says some headway has been achieved despite ongoing complexities. Kiev announces a new round of talks with Washington next week on metals agreement. Hello and welcome to your nightly news. First, in our news, 12 Palestinians were killed and others injured at dawn on Friday after Israeli occupation forces bombed several homes in the town of Bani Suhaila, east of Khan Yunis in southern Gaza. Local sources reported that 10 martyrs, including children and women, were brought to the European hospital after strikes targeted the homes of Baraka family and another adjacent to Bani Suhaila. The occupation also targeted a vehicle transporting Palestinians, killing 2 individuals in Khan Yunis. And a number of Palestinians were killed and others injured last night in an Israeli airstrike targeting the Tel area in northern Gaza. According to local Palestinian sources, Israeli warplanes carried out an airstrike that hit a home in Tel killing journalist Tamer Maqdad, his daughter, and several members of his family.
We were asleep at midnight. We heard the blast hitting our neighbor's house. Tanks and posts fell on our house. My son was sleeping in the room, and he was blown off along with his bed and closet. His mother and I were taken out by people, but he died.
And still in the same context, 13 Palestinians were killed and others injured on Friday in Israeli air raids targeting homes and a civilian vehicle in Rafah. This comes amid the occupation's ongoing escalation across the entire Gaza Strip. 4 Palestinians were also killed in an Israeli airstrike that targeted the Zaytun neighborhood in Gaza City. Medical sources in Gaza announced Friday that the number of martyrs rose to 4, including children and women, following an Israeli strike on a tent sheltering displaced persons near Badr Mosque in Zaytun. Rescue efforts are still underway for severely burned victims who were transferred to hospitals. 49 Palestinians were killed and others injured in intense Israeli airstrikes on Gaza since early Friday morning. According to a statement by the Palestinian Ministry of Health in Gaza, dozens were martyred, with 49 bodies received by hospitals as a preliminary toll. Many of the victims were children and women from the same families following Israeli strikes on densely populated residential areas. The Al-Qassam Brigade's Hamas military wing said its fighters lured an Israeli force near a booby-trapped tunnel entrance and detonated multiple explosive devices after several soldiers entered. Al-Qassam stated that the operation carried out Wednesday in the Al-Qizan al-Najjar area south of Khan Yunis resulted in several Israeli casualties, both killed and wounded. The brigades also claimed to have targeted 3 Israeli D9 military bulldozers yesterday, Thursday, with a Yassin 105 shell, Shawaz explosive, and a barrel bomb in the same area. Saraya al-Quds, the military wing of the Islamic Jihad movement, released footage showing its fighters targeting Israeli soldiers and their invading vehicles in Rafah using mortar shells and 107 rockets. Let's take a look.
الله أكبر ولله الحمد. أخي الحبيب من قلب الشبوره المعنويات عالية يا رب، ولن نفرح أماكننا بإذن الله. وإحنا قبل شوي ضربناهم بالنار والبارود، وإن شاء الله بإذن الله إن عادوا عدنا يا رب. عادوا عدنا إحنا من قلب الشبوره.
The head of Hamas in Gaza, Khalil al-Hayya, affirmed the movement's readiness to immediately begin comprehensive negotiations, including the release of all Israeli captives in exchange for an agreed-upon number of Palestinian prisoners. In a recorded statement, al-Hayya said the occupation must, in return, cease the war completely, withdraw entirely from Gaza, ensure the start of reconstruction, and end the blockade.
The movement has expressed its readiness to immediately begin comprehensive package negotiations under which all captives held by the resistance and an agreed-upon number of Palestinian prisoners in the occupation's prisons would be released in exchange for a complete cessation of the war on our people, full withdrawal from the Gaza Strip, the start of reconstruction, and the lifting of the blockade.
Khalil al-Hayya added that the resistance arms are tied to the existence of the occupation, stressing that Hamas will not be part of advancing Netanyahu's policy of partial agreements, which he described as a cover for an agenda of extermination.
The resistance and its arms are inherently linked to the presence of the occupation. They are a natural right for our people and for all peoples under occupation. The partial agreements used by Netanyahu and his government serve merely as a cover for their political agenda, which is based on continuing the war, genocide, and starvation, even at the cost of sacrificing all the captives. We refuse to be part of facilitating or endorsing such a policy.
The Israeli occupation escalated its aggression Thursday night and into Friday morning against Palestinians and their homes in the city of Tulkarm, its 2 refugee camps, and surrounding areas, marking the 82nd consecutive day of attacks. According to the Palestinian news agency, Israeli forces carried out raids and assaults in several areas of the city, firing heavily and arresting a number of Palestinians. In the Noor al-Shams refugee camp, Israeli forces fired extensively at Palestinian homes in the Jabal al-Nasr area as the camp witnesses a campaign of forced displacement targeting residents in the Jabal al-Salihin and Jabal al-Nasr neighborhoods. And in other news, Sahrawi President and Polisario Secretary General Ibrahim Ghali has called on the UN Security Council to uphold its responsibility toward the Sahrawi people. Speaking at the 10th Congress of the Union of Workers of Sagia al-Hamra and Rio de Oro in the Dakhla refugee camp, Ghali reaffirmed the Polisario's readiness to help end the occupation and called for action to ensure the Sahrawi people's right to self-determination.
The movement has expressed its readiness to immediately begin comprehensive package negotiations under which all captives held by the resistance and an agreed-upon number of Palestinian prisoners in the occupation's prisons would be released in exchange for a complete cessation of the war on our people, full withdrawal from the Gaza Strip, the start of reconstruction, and the lifting of the blockade.
Sahrawi President Ibrahim Ghali reaffirmed that all attempts to bypass the Sahrawi people's right to self-determination will fail and will not deter them from claiming their legitimate rights. He also called on Sahrawis to remain united and resilient in the face of all efforts aimed at erasing their cause.
It affirms that all attempts to bypass the inalienable and non-negotiable rights of the Sahrawi peoples to self-determination and independence are doomed to fail, no matter how extensive the conspiracies and misinformation that accompany them may be.
The General Union of Algerian Workers has reaffirmed its support for the Sahrawi people and their just cause. Speaking at the 10th Congress of the General Union of Sahrawi Workers, the union's representative and head of the Algerian delegation stated that the Algerian workers stand firmly with the Sahrawi people in their struggle for self-determination, freedom, and independence.
Our presence today is in support of the General Union of Sahrawi Workers in their 10th Congress to reaffirm our stance alongside them in their struggle and their just cause, the right to self-determination and, God willing, the reconstruction of their homeland.
The Polisario Front has condemned Spanish Foreign Minister José Manuel Alvarez for supporting Morocco's expansionist policy in Western Sahara, calling it a clear violation of international law and the Sahrawi people's right to self-determination. The front said Alvarez's command shows open support for Moroccan interests and contradicts Spain's stated commitment to human rights.
This position, taken by the Spanish government led by the Spanish Socialist Workers' Party, does not enjoy the support of the Spanish public nor the majority of political forces in the country, which have expressed their rejection of this foreign policy. It stands in contradiction to the sentiment of the Spanish citizens and all political parties, except for the one to which the minister belongs.
Anti-normalization activists in Morocco organized massive demonstrations across the kingdom rejecting normalization and denouncing the crimes of the Zionist occupation against oppressed Palestinian people in Gaza. Tough slogans raised during the protests. The anti-normalization activists in Morocco affirmed their categorical rejection of the Makhzen's regime's policy of normalization with the Zionist entity, which continues to commit the most heinous crimes in Gaza, claiming dozens of lives.
In denunciation of the continued Moroccan normalization process and in denunciation of all those who remain silent, who accept and don't react, we're staging this protest to react and support our brothers in Gaza.
Iran believes reaching an agreement on its nuclear program with the U.S. is possible as long as Washington is realistic, Foreign Minister Abbas Araghchi said on Friday on the eve of a second round of talks with the Trump administration. Araghchi told the joint news conference in Moscow after talks with Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov of Russia that if the U.S. demonstrate seriousness of intent and do not make unrealistic demands, reaching agreements is possible.
جناب آقای لاوروف رو در جریان
The path of diplomacy remains open, and the notion of indirect talks is not something that is complicated or strange, and it is possible to reach an agreement through indirect talks. We have seen a certain level of seriousness in the first round of talks from the Americans in Oman. And if they are ready to discuss the nuclear issue, and only the nuclear issue, in a serious set of discussions, without involving other matters, then we can progress further towards a constructive dialogue. So, as I said, if demands are not made by the US side that are impossible to act upon, then it could be feasible to reach an agreement.
And Russian Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov said that Russia was ready to assist, mediate, and play any role that will be beneficial to Iran and the USA.
We are ready to help and mediate, to play any role that will be helped from the Iranian point of view and acceptable for the United States. We proceed from the fact that the only way to get an agreement, as the minister has just said, is to agree exclusively on nuclear issues.
And the US and Iran are back at the negotiating table, this time in Rome, in a major diplomatic effort to bring the nuclear deal back to life. There's a lot at stake in these talks, with the whole world paying close attention. A breakthrough could change the course of the Middle East, but getting there won't be easy. Marwa Belawar tells you more.
7 years after the Iran nuclear deal was torn apart, negotiators are back at the table, this time in Rome with Yemeni mediation and rising urgency. Iran's Foreign Minister Abbas Araghchi and U.S. envoy Steve Witkoff are trying to revive the spirit of the 2015 agreement, the same deal President Trump abandoned in 2018. The talks are gaining momentum following a high-profile visit to Tehran by AIEA chief Rafael Grossi. He warned that Iran may be dangerously close to developing a nuclear bomb and cautioned that any agreement without international oversight would be meaningless. At the core of the standoff, Washington wants a full stop to Iran's uranium enrichment. Tehran calls that a non-starter. For the UN nuclear watchdog, this puts added pressure to ensure any deal is not just political theater, but enforceable. Grossi's visit is also seen as a signal Europe, particularly France, Germany and the UK, wants back in after being sidelined under the Trump administration. From Paris, US Secretary of State Marco Rubio delivered a twofold message. The US is committed to a peaceful resolution but won't allow Iran to reach nuclear capability. The snapback sanctions mechanism is back on the table as leverage. As negotiators meet in Rome, Zionist officials are already in Paris, a clear move to shape talks and head off any breakthrough that doesn't include them. With strategic interests colliding, the path forward is anything but clear. For now, the world watches as Washington and Tehran once again test whether diplomacy can keep a decades-old crisis from boiling over.
An Iranian President Masoud Pezeshkian said that his country's government does not link its actions and efforts to talks with the United States regarding Iran's nuclear program. In a speech delivered on Friday at a meeting of heads of Iranian universities and medical schools, Pezeshkian stressed that Tehran does not seek war, but rather seeks a diplomatic and political settlement to regional and international disputes.
We are trying to resolve our regional differences. We are trying to resolve our differences with the world. We are not and never have been seeking war. It is Israel that is committing acts of terror. It carries out terrorism openly. We will never yield to any humiliation. This is our belief and conviction. But of course, we are not looking for war with anyone. We want peace and security in the world. We want all the people living on this planet to live in peace and security.
US President Donald Trump said on Friday that he was against Iran having nuclear weapons. Trump told reporters on Friday when asked if he would consider letting Tehran keep a civil nuclear program. Trump has threatened to attack Iran if it does not reach a deal with the US over its nuclear program, which Iran says is peaceful, but the West says is aimed at building an atomic bomb.
I'm for stopping Iran, very simply, from having a nuclear weapon. They can't have a nuclear weapon. I want Iran to be great and prosperous and terrific. They can't have a nuclear weapon, and if they have a nuclear weapon, you'll all be very unhappy. You'll all be very unhappy because your life will be in great danger. Yeah.
And the Kremlin said on Friday that some progress had already been made in talks about a possible peace settlement to end the war in Ukraine, but that contacts were rather complicated with the US. The Kremlin affirmed in a statement that Russia is committed to resolving this conflict, ensuring its own interests, and is open to dialogue.
Contacts going on are quite complicated because naturally the topic of peace settlement in Ukraine is not an easy one. Russia is committed to resolving this conflict, ensuring its own interests, and is open to dialogue. We continue to do this. We believe that some progress can already be noted. This is the progress regarding this temporary moratorium on strikes against energy infrastructure that Russia has been adhering to. The Russian Federation has been abiding by this moratorium, which is not the case for the Ukrainian side. Therefore, certain developments have already been achieved. But of course, there are still many complex discussions ahead.
Secretary of State Marco Rubio said Friday that the US may be ready to move on from efforts for a Russia-Ukraine peace deal if there is not progress in the coming days. Speaking in Paris after a marathon day of landmark talks among US, Ukrainian and European officials, Rubio said the discussions had been constructive and produced an outline for steps toward peace.
I think it's important to remind everybody that the Ukraine war is a terrible thing, but it's not our war. We didn't start it. The United States has been helping Ukraine over the last 3 years, and we want it to end. But it's not our war. I want everyone to understand that. And the reason why I make that point is the president has spent 87 days at the highest level of his government repeatedly taking efforts to bring this war to an end. We are now reaching a point where we need to decide and determine whether this is even possible or not, which is why we're engaging both sides.
Ukrainian Deputy Minister of Economy Taras Kashka announced that a new round of negotiations over a metal agreement between Ukraine and the US will begin on April 24. In a statement, Kashka noted that there are ongoing efforts to resolve numerous technical issues in order to identify the most sensitive matters that require political decisions, as he put it. In late Thursday, the US and Ukrainian governments signed a memorandum of intent expressing their commitment to finalizing the metals agreement. China denied on Friday accusations by Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky that Beijing was supplying weapons to Russia. Chinese Foreign Ministry spokesman Lin Jian said at a daily press conference that China has never provided lethal weapons to any party in the Ukrainian crisis, adding that its position on the issue has always been clear and in support of a ceasefire, the end of the conflict, and a promotion of peace talks.
China's position on the Ukrainian issue has always been clear, and it has been actively committed to stopping the war and ceasefire and promoting peace talks. China has never provided lethal weapons to any party in the conflict and has strictly controlled dual-use military and civilian items. Ukraine is very clear about this and has publicly stated that most of the parts and components of the weapons imported by Russia come from the United States and other Western countries. China firmly opposes groundless accusations and political manipulation.
The Houthi group Ansarullah in Yemen announced on Friday that the death toll from the overnight US strike on an oil port in Al-Hudaydah Governorate, Western Yemen, has risen to 80, killed more than 170 injured. In a statement, the group said that the toll from the strike on the Ras Isa facility is exposed to rise. These airstrikes are considered the deadliest in the ongoing series of intense aerial attacks launched by Washington on various areas in Yemen over the past month. The Yemeni Houthi group Ansarullah announced on Friday that it targeted a military site near Ben Gurion Airport with a ballistic missile. The group's military spokesperson Yahya Sariyah stated that the operation targeted a military site in the vicinity of the airport in the occupied Jaffa area, noting that the group continues to confront American aggression, as he put it. Ladies and gentlemen, that's a wrap for tonight's program. Thanks for watching, and bye-bye.